Well, it seems the only one capable of beating Kevin Harvick is Kevin Harvick. How's it going, everybody? My name is Eric, and welcome to Out of the Groove. I'm excited for today's show, not just because I have a pretty good amount of stuff to talk about, but because for the first time in like 4 weeks, almost a month, I'm not going to be talking about how amazing Kevin Harvick is for 15 minutes. So that's great, but I'll get into that more in a second. The West Coast swing for the NASCAR Cup Series is officially over for the time being. We've run at Las Vegas, Phoenix ISM Raceway, and now Auto Club Speedway. And while the first couple races were dominated by Kevin Harvick, Toyota finally broke through and won at Auto Club. Martin Truex Jr., the 2017 champion, gets his first win of 2018, and it only took him 5 races. And although on the stat sheet, when they show that he won by like 11 seconds, you might think he dominated this race. No, not really. He was clearly one of the best cars for most of the race. He did win all 3 stages, but it still didn't really feel like he just dominated, you know? He was the best car for most of the day, but you had drivers like Kyle Busch, Kyle Larson, and early on possibly Kevin Harvick that looked like they were close to or at least could have competed with Martin Truex. And in fact, if not for Kyle Busch's team making the wrong adjustment on the final stop of the race, we might have had a pretty good 2-car battle for the win. But ultimately, it feels like this year's Auto Club 400 was just a race of a lot of missed opportunities. Because, like I said, Kyle Busch's team, they were close to Truex by the end of that race, but they just straight up made the wrong adjustment. The crew member just made the wrong adjustment for that car, loosened it up more than it should have been, and basically ruined Busch's chance of winning the race. And like I just alluded to, Kevin Harvick early on seemed like he was going to be tough to beat, and then basically wrecked himself, and we never really got a chance to see what he could do. So yeah, it felt like we kind of missed out on some battles that could have been fun. In fact, in Victory Lane even, people at Furniture Row Racing were saying they were kind of disappointed that Kevin Harvick wrecked so early because they were curious to see where they would stack up against him, because everyone's kind of using Harvick's team as the benchmark to know how their own teams are performing at this point. So I thought that was kind of funny to hear. But anyway, back to Harvick. That was probably the biggest highlight of the race. Kevin Harvick started the race in 10th and quickly started to drive towards the front. He was passing guys the moment he caught them. It was very early on looking like it was going to once again, for the 4th weekend in a row, it was going to be the Kevin Harvick show. That is until Kevin Harvick kind of fell back into old school RCR Kevin Harvick for a moment. While racing Kyle Larson near the end of stage 1, Kevin Harvick got a little bit loose on the exit of turn 2. Kyle Larson got loose too. In fact, Kyle Larson was kind of poking his nose out underneath Kevin Harvick, got a little bit loose at about the same time Kevin Harvick got a little bit loose. Both of them kind of had to save their cars, but as Kyle Larson then drew up even with Harvick down the backstretch, Harvick made an interesting choice. If you watched the race, you saw the replay. I don't need to sum it up, but Harvick drove down basically up into Kyle Larson's door, just doored him down the backstretch and turned himself into the outside wall. And at first on the replay, it looked like maybe both drivers were trying to side draft each other and it just didn't work out and they just came together. But upon further review, Kyle Larson really didn't move or change his line much at all. He might have moved up a foot or two, but Kevin Harvick moved down at least a good 5 to 10 feet. And it looked like he just wrecked himself. Everyone, TV, social media, everyone was trying to figure out what Kevin Harvick was doing there to cause such an incident. Because the obvious answer is he was trying to side draft. You know, Auto Club's a big track. A lot of drafting is actually very important down the straightaways. Side drafting is just as important. And so at first glance, it was like, oh, I think he's just going down there trying to side draft. But given the way the 2 cars were positioned, typically, I'm going to use my hands here. My little, you know, Larry McReynolds has his Ford cutaway car. I got my little hand cutaway puppetry here. Typically, if you're going to side draft a person, you got to get to about right here on them. Causes the air to hit their spoiler, which causes this car to slow down, so you got to get to here to slow them down. When Kevin Harvick pulled down on Kyle Larson, they were basically like this. They were pretty much even. He wasn't back here or anything, he was basically here. So it's hard to say if he was really trying to side draft him. If you ask me, I think Kevin Harvick kind of just lost his head for a second there, lost his cool. He'd been complaining a little bit about the handling of his race car. You know, he still had easily one of the top 2 or 3 cars there at that point in the race, but he'd been complaining, so possibly he wasn't super thrilled with the fact that he didn't have the best car by a long shot for the 4th week in a row. But Kevin Harvick has a history of kind of being a hothead, kind of overreacting, kind of getting overly aggressive when he doesn't need to be getting overly aggressive. So what it looked like to me was that Kevin Harvick wasn't too thrilled that Larson had been racing him hard for a couple laps. They'd been side by side for a while. Larson had gotten loose. Maybe Kevin Harvick thought Larson getting loose is what messed him up and got him kind of loose. So if you ask me, it looked like he kind of maybe just for a second there forgot that they were racing 200 miles an hour and thought they were racing at Martinsville or something and he could go down and like rub up against a guy. I know, maybe I'm just assuming too much here. It's not right to assume. But if you ask me, it looked like Harvick was just trying to pull down really close to Larson to maybe not hit him, but get really close to him to kind of imply that he was angry or upset with the way he was being raced, and it cost him. So it just goes to show you some things don't always change. Kevin Harvick has a history, like I said, of being kind of ornery. He likes to get in altercations with guys, usually just with words, but with cars or get involved sometimes as well. But man, I just laughed after the incident because I'm like, what are you doing? You've won 3 races in a row. You clearly have one of the top cars again, and you're gonna throw it away like that in the first stage. It's just, I'll give him credit. He owned up to it in his post-race interview. He called it a dumb move. He felt bad. He knew he made a mistake. He said he shouldn't have been trying to do that so early or trying to race so aggressively so early. So at least he owned up to it, which Kevin Harvick from 5-10 years ago might not have done that. He might have thrown all the blame on everyone. So I'll give him credit for that, but I'm still just laughing because, man, he was this close. Very likely he was going to get 4 wins in a row, something we haven't seen in more than 10 years. And, yeah, just didn't happen. And so for the rest of the field, we're going to have to wait 3 weeks, I guess, until we go to Texas Motor Speedway to see how everyone stacks up against Harvick on intermediate tracks once again. Because next week at Martinsville is a short track, a very short track, kind of hard to compare the two. If Kevin Harvick comes out and dominates next weekend at Martinsville, yeah, we got it. We've got issues. So that was the big highlight of the race, the big, twist, big dramatic event, and it was funny. So now, as I like to do early in the week, I like to look back at some notable finishers from the race, the previous race, and I like to kind of analyze where they stack up at this point. So let's look at some of the most notable finishes from Sunday. Truex winning is big. I mean, he's the defending champion. He's run pretty well the first few races this season, but he hasn't been dominant at any track yet until Auto Club, where he seemed to have the best car for most all of the day. And he also takes over the points lead, which doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things, but if you're looking like, oh, how consistent have we been this year? Truex has been the most consistent so far. They're leading the points. The second place finisher was Kyle Larson. Now everyone expected Larson to be really, really good this weekend at Auto Club. Coming into this race, he had won the last 4 races at 2-mile racetracks. So it was expected that he would run well, but he was not dominant, and he did not win this race, and it's, I think it's easy to assume that maybe the new Camaro body, they still haven't quite gotten a grip of this. Maybe this is the proof that we needed to show that Chevys are struggling a little bit just because of the Camaros. It's not the drivers as much as it is they're still getting a handle of the new technology, because Larson, who has been so good at this type of track the last couple of years, was still really good, but he was not quite as good as he'd been in years past. So I think this is a telling sign that Chevy's making progress, but they are definitely behind, and it's not necessarily any one driver or one crew chief that's making the issues. I think it's more of a Chevrolet in general, still making gains, still making progress, but it is a work in progress on that Camaro. But yeah, so it's still a good day for Larson, though, second place. I think he's, helping him out in points. He's up in the top 10 in points. Doesn't have a win yet, but that's good at least, so good things looking up for Kyle Larson. I want to take a moment to talk about the third place finisher, Kyle Busch. Like I talked about earlier, he was one of the most competitive cars all day. It looked like him or Truex were really the class of the field. Truex was definitely better, but until that last pit stop, it looked like Kyle Busch at least might have something to compete with him. But ultimately he didn't, and he fell back and finished third. And I want to pause to take a moment to talk about Kyle Busch, because he had a eventful evening after the race, I would say. Many of you probably saw he was tweeting up a storm late into Sunday evening, and even a little bit Monday morning. He was still tweeting at people constantly. I mean 30, 40, 50, 60 tweets and replies to fans, just in general tweets, basically defending himself and calling out haters and dissing people. I skimmed through a lot of them. Many of them were pretty cringy to read. I couldn't stomach too many of them, but it felt like I was watching a couple of kids quarrel about who gets to kick first on the kickball team, is how it felt like. But yeah, no one was safe. He tweeted at like I said, at least 40 or 50 different fans, different random Twitter users throughout the evening, just dissing him. I don't know. This is all because after the race, Fox Sports said that they could not catch up with Kyle Busch and interview him for TV. So Kyle Busch had no post-race TV interview. And when you finish third and have kind of an eventful day like he did, most fans watching expect him to make comments or expect the third place driver to be talked about and shown on TV. But Kyle Busch wasn't, and the way Fox presented it was that he had basically gotten away from them and they couldn't catch up to him, and it gave the illusion that Kyle Busch didn't want to talk to the media, which is nothing new. Kyle Busch, even this year, has declined in post-race interviews because he lost. And Kyle Busch has a history of anytime a little thing doesn't go well for him, he doesn't like to talk to people after the race. He's got a history of this, so that's kind of, a lot of fans immediately jump to the conclusion, myself included, assume that Kyle Busch just dissed on the media again and didn't want to talk because he didn't win. So that started the whole thing when Kyle Busch started ranting on Twitter about how, oh, Fox didn't come to him, they didn't want him in the media center, it wasn't his fault, they just didn't want to talk to him and all that stuff. And I'll believe him, he's probably telling the truth. Perhaps Fox was so worried about catching up with Kevin Harvick and Kyle Larson to get their sides of the earlier incident that they missed Kyle Busch. But the firestorm of tweets he sent out to not just the world in general, but then to specific people, still kind of proves the point that Kyle Busch is very thin-skinned. Pardon the NBA reference, I make a lot of references to other sports, but Kyle Busch is basically the Kevin Durant of NASCAR. He's thin-skinned. He can't take criticism well, or he does not like to take criticism. Any little criticism, whether it's fair, whether it's just, not constructive in any way, Kyle Busch has a very difficult time letting it go. I get occasional hate comments just on YouTube, occasionally on Twitter, but I get hate comments too, and I just ignore them for the most part. Back when I was younger, I would occasionally reply to them and let them go to my head a little bit, and I grew out of that. Nowadays, I just ignore the vast majority of them. But Kyle Busch, he's what, like 32, 33 years old, something like that? He still lets these comments go to his head. Kyle Busch has an extremely controversial history in NASCAR, a history that's caused him to be one of the, if not probably currently the most polarizing driver in the sport. I mean, he's got a lot of fans because he's clearly one of the most talented drivers out there. He's driving for good equipment, he's got good sponsorship, he's always up front, so he's got a lot of fans, but because of all these incidences where he ignores the media, likes to fan the flames of arguments, just kind of comes across arrogant sometimes, he's got a lot of haters. I think both sides there's good reasons to like him, good reasons to hate him. I've always tried to defend Kyle Busch. I think a lot of haters of Kyle Busch, don't hate him for the right reasons. But it's so hard to defend him sometimes because he's just childish. And, some people may like that kind of, I'm not going to take crap from anybody attitude. I'm going to call you out if you're calling me out. Some people like that attitude, and at times I do too, but not the way Kyle does it. I don't like that at all. So I'm calling it now. I'm officially done defending Kyle Busch. If you want to talk crap about Kyle Busch in the comments, I'm not going to defend him anymore. If you want to talk good about Kyle Busch, I'm not going to argue with you. I'm done. I'm done defending him for sure. I'm not going to attack him too much, but I am definitely not defending him anymore because he's childish. Nothing wrong with being childish. I like being childish. Everyone's got a little kid in them, I'm wearing a Disneyland t-shirt for crying out loud, but childishness, when you're a working professional like this, when you're a star like this, when, you should be able to handle a little bit of adversity. You shouldn't let comments from just anyone go to your head. That's no way to live. But that being said, I think the fact that Kyle Busch is very thin-skinned and goes on Twitter rants like these, I think that's great for the sport because it gives people like me and fans like you a reason to like or dislike him. Nobody has like a lukewarm opinion about Kyle Busch. Most everyone is either loves him or hates him. And so Kyle Busch is simultaneously like a hero of the sport to a lot of people, which is great, but at the same time he's also a villain, like a guy to root against for a lot of people in the sport, which is also great. Every good movie has a hero and a villain, that are button heads that are going up against each other. Every sport needs heroes. Every sport needs villains. Kyle Busch is both to a different group of people, which is why he's great for the sport. So as much as I'm going to rail against Kyle Busch from time to time, and a lot of haters will, and a lot of people will defend him and whatnot, as much as that's going to continue, I don't want it to change. I honestly, even if I criticize Kyle Busch, I don't want him to change. I want him to continue to do things for me to criticize because it's fun to talk about. So anyway, that's my definitive opinion at this point about Kyle Busch. He's done a ton of things in the past that I think are really dumb, really bad, and really don't make him look good. But he's done a lot of great things in his career. Like he's won tons of races. If we're going to talk about his just on-track accomplishments, he's one of the greatest. So I'm not going to hate Kyle Busch, but I'm definitely not going to defend him ever again because he's just immature. And I don't know, I don't really like guys in their 30s who can't handle criticism at all. But that's just me. So anyway, moving on, I'll talk about Team Penske a little bit. They had a great turnaround day. They've been so strong, like the rest of the Fords for the most part. They've been very strong the first few races of the season, but at Phoenix, our first short track of the season, they struggled, and they struggled pretty bad. They were all no-shows for that race. But Fontana, they came back strong. It's a big, fast track, so I think it's safe to say the Penske cars have the big tracks figured out pretty well. They all finished in the top 10, all three of them. Hendrick Motorsports, maybe as an organization, had an okay day, but it was kind of flip-flopped. The early parts of the season, it's been Chase Elliott who's kind of been flying the banner for Hendrick Motorsports. He's been their best car, despite not having all of the best finishes because of wrecks and whatnot, but he's had the best car pretty much week in, week out. Meanwhile, we've talked a ton about how Jimmy Johnson has underachieved and struggled, and meanwhile, Bowman and Byron have kind of just been there. Things were different though for them at Auto Club. Jimmy Johnson actually finished top 10, had a 9th place run. This all comes just a couple days after it was announced that Lowe's would not be returning next season, so it's, this is a good positive vibe, positive day for the 48 team. It actually gave them a huge boost in points. They went from being like 26th in points to now, because of some other people's struggles and their good day, they're 18th in points right now. It's pretty close still, but hey, that's a pretty big jump regardless. Meanwhile, Chase Elliott, who's been consistently running top 10, finished 16th, and honestly that was like the highest he ran most of the day. Now keep in mind, Chase Elliott was without a car chief, I believe, this weekend, so perhaps that had something to do with it, but still not a great day for Chase Elliott. Meanwhile, Byron and Bowman both had top 15 finishes. William Byron actually kind of impressed me for the second week in a row, I think it was. He looked pretty decent at Phoenix last weekend, and he looked, again, pretty decent here at Auto Club. Was running top 10 at a couple different points, so things are looking a little bit better for the 24 car there. Alex Bowman continues to just be there. That's really the best way I can describe Alex Bowman. He has not done anything remotely exciting yet, but he hasn't also, failed miserably yet. He's just kind of there, which is just fine if you're driving for Front Row Motorsports. But if you're driving for Hendrick and you're driving the 88 car that Dale Earnhardt Jr. has been driving for the last several years, you'd hope that you'd be able to make a little bit more of an impression on those around you. And right now, Alex Bowman is he's going through the motions. I feel like he shows up, he gives the same handful of boring answers to questions, he signs some autographs, thanks his sponsors, and goes out and runs 15th to 20th, which is, it's like I said, it's okay if you're doing that for Front Row Motorsports, but if you're doing that for Hendrick in the 88 car, you gotta give us something else, man. Still, things are going in the right direction. They were run 20th the first couple races. Now they're up running in the top 15. That's better. So hopefully things continue to improve. If Bowman can get to where he's running top 10 in a few weeks, that would be pretty great. But anyway, that's Hendrick Motorsports, still kind of in limbo. I don't really know what to make of Hendrick Motorsports right now. I want to give a brief shout out to Erik Jones. I'll make this quick, but Erik Jones is super impressing me so far this season, and I feel like he's not being talked about enough. I feel like everyone's acting like Erik Jones has been in the Cup Series for 4 or 5 years now, and that's why what he's doing isn't impressive. The dude's in his 2nd year. He's barely raced 1 full season in the Cup Series. He's like 21 years old? And he has 3 straight top 10s. He's finished 8th, 9th, and 7th in his last 3 races, an 11th place finish before that. He's 13th in points despite being caught up in a wreck at Daytona, and people aren't really talking about him. Guys, Erik Jones is the real deal. I was going to be excited if he was running the way he is now at the end of this season, but the fact that he's doing it right here, right now, he looks as good as Matt Kenseth did last year, and he's still got this whole season to improve. So I'm excited for Erik Jones. He's looking like a playoff contender. I mean, I thought he'd win a race this season, but now I'm actually feeling like he definitely is going to win a race this season. He might even make it to the round of 8. He could make some noises in the playoffs if they continue to improve. I'm just saying, people sleeping on Erik Jones. Like I said, I feel like people just kind of think, oh, Erik Jones has been here for years. This isn't that impressive. Because if this was like his 10th year in the sport, it wouldn't be that impressive. It'd be, okay, but not impressive. But guys, he's 21 years old. He's 21 years old. He's younger than all these other guys we're talking about, like Larson, Blaney, Chase Elliott. He's 21. So anyway, don't sleep on Erik Jones. That's all I gotta say. And on that note, that is my show. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll be back later this week. I'll talk a little bit about Martinsville. We go to our first really short track of the season, the Paperclip, where tons of drama is sure to unfold. I'm really excited for this one. We should see some different faces up front. It'll be interesting to see if Kevin Harvick wins and dominates at Martinsville like he has every other track this season, but I don't think that'll be the case. I expect JGR to be tough to beat. They've been so good at short tracks in recent years. Last 2 weeks, ever since we went to ISM Raceway, which is a shorter track, JGR's looked a little bit better. Toyota in general's looked a little bit better. So I'm curious to see how that race goes. Look forward to that in a couple of days. But yeah, you guys can follow me on Twitter, and you can leave comments to me. Either you can find me on Twitter, you can tweet at me, you can leave comments here. Keep a discussion going about this week's race. I thought this weekend's race was a good race. I'm surprised to kind of look around and feel like a lot of people were bored. The ending was boring, don't get me wrong. The last 50, 60 laps was not that exciting, but the first 3/4 of the race, you had a lot of great battles for position, battles for the lead, good restarts. You had the drama with Harvick. I thought this race had a little bit of everything, But that's just me. I'll go back to last week's episode. I guess I'm just an optimist about everything. Everyone else is still a little bit cynical. But that being said, thank you for watching. Subscribe, like, share, all that fun stuff. I'll see you guys in a couple days. Have a great week.